Welcome to Men of the March. This channel is built around history, war, endurance, leadership, discipline, collapse, and the hard lessons men leave behind when pressure strips life down to its essentials. This is not shallow motivation. It is not hero worship. It is not about pretending the past was cleaner, stronger, or simpler than the present. The men in these stories were not perfect. Some were brave, some were ambitious, some were foolish. Some endured because they had no other choice. But history gives us something valuable when we are willing to look at it honestly. It shows what men do when comfort disappears, when command fails, when fear arrives, when the road becomes longer than expected, when duty remains after confidence is gone. The purpose of this channel is not only to explain what happened, it is to ask what can still be learned from it, not as fantasy, not as slogans, but as reflection. Because the past does not hand us easy answers. It gives us examples, warnings, and questions. And sometimes that is enough to begin the march. Episode 1. The army that had to save itself. Chapter 1. Loss of Command. Cyrus was dead. Not Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, but Cyrus the Younger, a Persian prince, a son of Darius II, and the younger brother of King Artaxerxes II. In autumn of 401 BCE, near a place remembered as Cunaxa, not far from Babylon, Cyrus gambled for a throne. He had gathered a mixed army, including thousands of Greek mercenaries, and marched into the empire of his brother. His aim was not a border raid. It was the crown. For the Greeks who followed him, the campaign had promised pay, opportunity, and perhaps plunder. Many of them were experienced soldiers from a Greek world recently scarred by the Peloponnesian War. They were not crusaders. They were not innocent men dragged into a foreign conflict against their will. They were hired fighters in a Persian dynastic struggle. That moral fact matters, because the story of the 10,000 is powerful, but it is not pure. It is not a simple tale of good men against evil foreigners. It is a story of ambition, money, deception, discipline, fear, leadership, and survival after failure. At Cunaxa, the Greek wing appears to have performed well in its immediate fight. According to Xenophon, who was there and later wrote the main surviving account, the Greeks drove back the troops facing them. In that narrow tactical sense, they succeeded. But battles are not won by one wing alone. Cyrus charged toward Artaxerxes. Ancient sources agree that he died in the fighting, though they differ on the exact details of his final moments. Once Cyrus was dead, the political reason for the entire expedition collapsed. The king remained king. The challenger was gone. And the Greek mercenaries, who had marched deep within the king's empire, found themselves armed, exposed, and unwanted. This is where the story becomes more than a battle. A battle can test courage for an hour. A retreat can test discipline for months. The Greeks had to move through strange country, hostile peoples, river barriers, mountain passes, hunger, snow, and suspicion. They had to bargain when they could, fight when they had to, and keep their formation when panic would have broken them apart. And before they could do any of that, they had to survive the loss of their own leaders. The campaign had already failed. The question now was whether the army would fail with it. Chapter 2. The World Before the Crisis. To understand why thousands of Greek soldiers ended up near Babylon, you have to begin before the march. The Greek world had just come through decades of war. Athens and Sparta had exhausted one another and their allies in the Peloponnesian War, which ended in 404 BCE. Across the Greek world, men who knew how to fight could be found. Some had served in citizen armies, some had experience in long campaigns, some were simply looking for pay. War creates veterans. Peace does not always know what to do with them. Cyrus the Younger understood the value of Greek heavy infantry. Greek hoplites, fighting in close order with shield and spear, had a reputation for discipline and battlefield strength. Cyrus also had previous ties with Sparta and with Greek commanders, and he could draw experienced men into his service. But Cyrus's problem was not only military, it was dynastic. His father, Darius II, had died. His older brother, Artaxerxes II, held the throne. Ancient Greek sources and later summaries present a court world of suspicion, accusation and favor, with Cyrus's mother, Parysatis, favoring him. The details must be handled carefully because much of what survives comes through Greek writers, not Persian records. But the broad situation is clear enough. Cyrus believed, or at least acted as if he believed, that he could challenge his brother for power. The Greek mercenaries were not told everything at the beginning. Xenophon and Diodorus both preserve the idea that Cyrus used local military pretexts as he gathered and moved his forces. The campaign was presented as if it concerned local enemies or regional operations. How much every officer suspected and how much every soldier knew cannot be reconstructed with perfect certainty. But the sources support the safer conclusion. Many of the troops were not openly told at first that they were being drawn into a campaign against the great king himself. The road made the truth harder to hide. As the army moved eastward from Western Asia Minor, the scale of the expedition became clearer. Towns, rivers, distances and rumors all pointed in the same direction. At Thapsacus, on the Euphrates, the reality could no longer be disguised. Xenophon says Cyrus told the Greek generals that the march was against the great king, toward Babylon. Diodorus also presents the army as reluctant and kept moving by promises of greater reward. This is an important moment. The Greeks had not merely joined a local campaign, they were now participating in an attempt to replace the ruler of the Persian Empire, and many of them continued. That does not make them uniquely wicked. It makes them soldiers in the ancient world, men whose choices were shaped by pay, command, opportunity, fear, and the bonds of the army around them. But it also means the later hardship should not be washed clean of responsibility. They marched into danger because a prince wanted a throne, and because enough armed men agreed to keep walking. Chapter 3. The crisis begins. By the time the armies met at Cunaxa, the stakes were no longer hidden. Cyrus had brought his forces deep into Mesopotamia. Artaxerxes came to meet him. The battlefield itself is difficult to reconstruct in every detail, and ancient numbers for the Persian royal army are widely treated with caution. Xenophon reports enormous figures for the king's forces, but those should not be repeated as if they were a modern census. Ancient authors often used vast numbers to communicate scale and danger. What matters for the script of history is not the exact size of every contingent. It is the structure of the disaster. Xenophon reports that before Cunaxa, the Greek force included 10,400 hoplites and 2,500 peltasts. Those numbers should be understood as Xenophon's report, not as a perfect audited count. The men were not a single national army. They came under different commanders. Among the most important was Clearchus, a Spartan commander who led a major part of the Greek force. On the field, the Greek troops did what Greek heavy infantry often did well. They advanced in formation. The troops facing them gave way. In the immediate sector before them, the Greek wing succeeded. But then the battle became something more dangerous than a line of infantry pushing another line back. Cyrus saw Artaxerxes, or believed he saw the decisive moment, and charged toward him. Ancient accounts agree that Cyrus was killed, but they differ on exactly how it happened. Xenophon gives one version. Diodorus gives another shape to the event. Plutarch, drawing on Ctesias and other traditions, preserves additional details. A responsible telling does not pretend certainty where the sources differ. The essential fact is enough. Cyrus died. When a claimant dies in a dynastic war, his army does not merely lose a commander. It loses the political reason it exists. The Greeks had not failed because their infantry collapsed in its sector. They failed because the man they served was dead, and the king he opposed still lived. That is the hard distinction between tactical success and strategic failure. A man can win the fight in front of him and still lose the war he is inside. After Cunaxa, the Greeks were in a strange position. They were dangerous enough that they could not simply be ignored. They were stranded enough that they could not simply go home. They still had weapons. They still had discipline. They still had commanders. For the moment. Negotiations followed. The Persian side had its own interests, fears, and calculations, but those are not preserved from a Persian perspective in the way we would want. The story we have is mainly Greek. That means the moral framing comes to us through Greek outrage and Greek memory. According to Xenophon, 5 leading Greek generals went into the camp of Tissaphernes under the cover of negotiation: Clearchus, Proxenus, Menon, Aegeus, and Socrates of Achaean. Xenophon says they were seized and that men outside were cut down. He later says the captured generals were taken to the king and executed by beheading. Diodorus also preserves the tradition that the commanders were seized and killed, though the details are not identical. For the Greeks, whatever the Persian reasoning, the effect was devastating. The army's head had been removed. First Cyrus, then the generals. Now the men had to ask a question that all armies fear. Who commands when command is gone? Chapter 4. Men Under Pressure. The night after the commanders were lost is one of the most important moments in Xenophon's account. It is also one of the moments that requires the most caution. Xenophon was not just a witness, he was an author writing about events in which he himself played a role. His account is vivid, organized, and morally shaped. He presents speeches. He presents decisions. He presents his own emergence in a way that later readers have naturally remembered. That does not mean the scene is false. It means we should not treat it like a modern recording. In Xenophon's own account, The army was in danger not only from enemies outside it, but from paralysis within it. The leading commanders were gone. Former allies could no longer be trusted. Markets were not available. Guides were uncertain or absent. Rivers blocked routes. Cavalry was lacking. The army was far from Greek cities, deep within hostile territory, and surrounded by people who had no reason to help them. The danger was practical. If they waited too long, they could be encircled, starved, deceived again, or broken apart. This is where Xenophon presents himself as unable to remain passive. He describes a moment of urgent thought, then action. He calls officers together. He argues that they must not wait for rescue. They must choose leaders, restore order, and prepare to move. The lesson here is not that Xenophon alone saved everyone. That would be too simple and too close to the author's own self-presentation. The safer truth is stronger. In Xenophon's own telling, he became one of the effective leaders in a moment when leadership was no longer ceremonial. It was survival. Leadership under pressure is not the same as leadership in comfort. In comfort, titles can hide weakness. In crisis, useless authority becomes visible very quickly. The Greeks needed men who could speak, organize, persuade, decide, and endure. They needed commanders who understood that panic would kill as surely as enemy spears. An army is not just a mass of armed bodies. It is order. It is habit. It is trust under strain. Once that order breaks, every man becomes easier to destroy. The Greeks elected or recognized new leaders and began to reorganize. This did not make them safe. It made them capable of movement. And movement was life. The retreat that followed should not be imagined as a clean, heroic march with banners snapping in the wind. It was slower, uglier, and more uncertain than that. It involved bargaining with local peoples, taking supplies where they could, fighting when they had to, and making hard decisions with incomplete knowledge. The Greeks were not walking through empty land. They were moving through regions inhabited by communities with their own interests, fears, and defenses. To those communities, the Greeks were not noble survivors. They were armed outsiders. That complexity matters. Survival for the Greeks could mean danger for others. Chapter 5. The Turning Point. The road north was not one crisis. It was a chain of them. The Greeks had to move through river country, rough terrain, and hostile zones. One of the hardest passages came through the territory of the Carduchians, a mountain people whom Xenophon presents as enemies of the king. The Greeks may have hoped that the enemy of their enemy would allow them passage. That hope did not hold. The Carduchians attacked them in the mountains. And mountains change war. A hoplite formation that can dominate open ground is less comfortable in narrow tracks, steep slopes, and broken terrain. Men above you do not need to meet you shield to shield. They can harass, delay, and bleed you. Every climb costs strength. Every delay consumes food. Every wounded animal becomes a burden. Every lost guide turns distance into danger. Then came Armenia and winter. This is where the source material becomes severe without needing embellishment. Xenophon describes deep snow, hunger, men collapsing, pack animals dying, snow blindness, frost injuries, and exhaustion so heavy that some men could barely be made to move. Diodorus preserves a similar picture of cold, snow, losses and recovery in villages. There is no need to make this cinematic with invented suffering. The facts are enough. A man can be brave in battle and still be broken by cold. A disciplined army can survive a charge and still be threatened by hunger. Courage does not make feet warm. Resolve does not fill an empty stomach. This is where the story becomes more than history. The Greeks had already passed the visible drama of Cunaxa. The prince was dead. The generals were gone. The great battle was behind them. But the real test continued in the ordinary brutality of the march, waking cold, moving tired, obeying orders, protecting the line, carrying equipment, looking for food, staying with the group when the body wanted to stop. Most men imagine crisis as a single decisive moment. History often reveals something harder. Crisis can become routine. It can be morning after morning of doing what must be done while no one feels heroic. The famous moment came near Mount Thetches. According to Xenophon, the rear of the army heard shouting from the men ahead and thought another danger had appeared. Then the cry spread. The men at the front had seen the sea. The phrase was thalata, thalata, translated to the sea, the sea. The soldiers embraced. Some wept. They built a cairn. The meaning of that moment is easy to misunderstand. They were not home. They were not safe. The Black Sea did not erase the dead, restore the commanders, or end every danger. But it gave them something they had not had in the same way before. Visible proof that the Greek world was reachable. The sea was not home. It was hope. And sometimes hope is not comfort. Sometimes hope is simply enough evidence to keep moving. Chapter 6: Consequences and Historical Meaning. After the sight of the sea, the army still had to continue. They reached Trapezus on the Black Sea, most likely in 400 BCE after the winter march. From there, the story did not end in one clean homecoming. The remnants of the army moved along the Black Sea coast, through Greek cities, disputes, negotiations, shortages, and further complications. Xenophon's full account continues beyond the single emotional high point at Thetches. A lesser telling would end with the sea and pretend the lesson was complete. But survival rarely works that way. A breakthrough is not the same as deliverance. A man may see the direction home and still have miles of trouble ahead. At Ceresus, Xenophon reports that 8,600 men were under arms. Diodorus later gives a figure of 8,300 at Chrysopolis. The exact number depends on source and location, but both figures point toward the same reality. The army had been reduced. Men had been lost to fighting, weather, illness, exhaustion, and the demands of the march. The 10,000 is a traditional name, not a precise final count. What survived was not every man. What survived was enough order to keep the army from dissolving. That is the central historical meaning of the episode. The march was not a victory in the usual sense. Cyrus failed. His bid for the throne died with him. The Greeks did not conquer Persia. They did not return as innocent heroes from a righteous cause. They were mercenaries who had followed ambition into danger and then had to deal with the consequences. But within that failed campaign, something worth studying happened. After their mission collapsed, after their commanders were taken, after the route home became uncertain, the army did not immediately disintegrate. It rebuilt command. It preserved discipline. It kept moving. That does not make the cause pure, but it does make the response serious. History is often abused when people strip away context and keep only the feeling they want. The 10,000 can easily become a cheap story about toughness, but the deeper lesson is less comfortable. These men were not saved by emotion. They were not saved by slogans. They were not saved by pretending fear did not exist. They survived because enough of them remained organized under pressure. Enough obeyed. Enough led. Enough carried the wounded logic of the army forward after the original purpose was dead. And Xenophon, for all the caution required in reading his account, preserved a story that has lasted because it shows leadership forming under stress. Not in theory, not in a classroom, not in a speech made after the danger had passed, but in the dark, after disaster, when waiting had become dangerous. Chapter 7. Reflection. The lesson of the 10,000 is not that every man must be a warrior. It is not that ancient men were better than modern men. It is not that hardship automatically makes men noble. Hardship can make men cruel, desperate, selfish, or broken. The Greeks themselves were capable of violence, coercion, and self-interest. Their endurance should not be confused with moral innocence. The lesson is narrower, harder, and more useful. A failed mission does not end responsibility. Cyrus died. The campaign failed. The political objective collapsed. But the men still had duties to one another. They still had to march. They still had to decide, guard, carry, negotiate, bury, endure, and obey. There is a lesson here, but it is not a comfortable one. Many men prepare themselves only for the version of life where the plan works. They know what they will do if the promotion comes, if the business succeeds, if the relationship holds, if the leader is competent, if the road is clear. But history often turns on the other question. What do you do after the plan dies? The 10,000 were not made admirable by the cause that brought them into Persia. They became worth studying because when that cause collapsed, they still had to become useful. Panic would have scattered them. Self-pity would have slowed them. Fantasy would have killed them. Discipline did not remove fear. It gave fear a formation to march inside. That is why this story still matters. Not because modern life is the same as an ancient retreat through hostile country. The modern man watching this does not face the Carduchian mountains or the Armenian snow, but he does face collapse in smaller forms. A lost job, a failed plan, a broken family structure, a leader who fails, a duty that remains after confidence is gone, a season where no one is coming to restore order for him. The question for the modern man is not whether his hardship is the same. It is whether his response has any of the same discipline. History does not ask whether a man feels ready. It records what he does when the pressure arrives. The Greeks reached the sea, but the sea was not home. It was only the first proof that home could still be imagined. That may be the strongest lesson of the march. Sometimes the first sign of hope does not end the suffering. It simply gives a man enough reason to keep moving. And when the road is long, when leadership has failed, when the mission has collapsed, when fear walks beside you, the first duty is not to feel inspired. The first duty is to remain useful, to keep order, to take the next step, to march. Thank you for watching this episode of Men of the March. The story of Xenophon and the 10,000 is not valuable because it gives us a simple hero to admire or a clean victory to celebrate. It is valuable because it leaves behind a harder lesson. A failed mission does not end responsibility. The Greeks reached the sea, but the sea was not home. It was only proof that home could still be imagined. The road continued, the hardship continued, but hope had become visible again. That is often how endurance works. Not with a sudden rescue, not with a perfect ending, but with one more reason to keep moving. If this story gave you something to think about, stay with the channel. Future episodes will continue looking at men under pressure. Soldiers, commanders, kings, philosophers, explorers, and ordinary men caught in extraordinary moments. Not to worship them, not to excuse them, but to learn from what history reveals when comfort disappears. This has been Men of the March. Until the next episode, keep order, carry the weight, and take the next step.